This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark?
What the hell is going on, Danny, is we're going to get down to the bottom of the immigration problem today. Because the reality is nobody knows all the numbers. Nobody knows how many people came in. What are they doing to the economy? There's a lot of people speculating out there, but we've got the world's greatest demographer at AEI, Nick Eberstadt, and he has produced a report called America's Immigration Mess, an Illustrated Guide, in which he dug through all the numbers. And what we found is that a lot of the data is really bad. But based on what can be known, Nick has come up with the numbers and the data to explain the immigration mess.
First of all, I think he dismisses a lot of tropes. So, for example, there's a tendency to think that a lot of immigrants in the United States are Mexicans. The number of Mexicans in the United States actually peaked in 2007. And the people who are crossing through Mexico and coming into the United States are not Mexicans. There are tons and tons of Venezuelans. There are tons and tons of Guatemalans, people from Honduras, people from Ecuador or Nicaragua, but not Mexicans, which is really fascinating and good news because Mexicans want to stay in Mexico because their economy is doing better even though they have a terrible government. But there are other tropes here. Some time ago, you and I had a lovely guy from the Center for Immigration Studies, and one of the arguments that he made is that, yes, it's true that illegal migration is a huge problem. Yes, it's true that illegal migration is a source of great angst for Americans. But he made an argument that pro-immigration folks like to make a lot, which is that illegal migrants are a net source of income to the U.S. government. And one of the things that Nick does is he looks at everybody's data. He looks at data that is disparate, disagrees, pulls it all together, and suggests that actually that's not true. Illegal migrants are not a net gain to the economy. Even legal migrants over time will not be net gain to the economy. And that's pretty devastating.
Well, and that's an indictment not just of migration, but of the welfare state. So, we get into this with Nick, but the difference between migration a century ago and even half a century ago and today is that most people weren't coming for economic aid. They were coming for opportunity. They were coming to work. If you go back to the early days of migration into this country in the earlier waves, there was no welfare state. You showed up in New York Harbor, you got through Ellis Island, and you went to Little Italy, or you went to Chinatown, or you went to the Polish community, and you connected with people there. They found you a place to stay. They set you up with a job. You started working, and there literally was no welfare. Now we've got a situation where the migrants coming into New York, I go up to New York for Fox News all the time, and I stay in Times Square because that's where Fox News is. And there's a hotel a block away from my hotel, which is a luxury hotel in Times Square that in normal circumstances would be $400 a night. And it's been entirely taken over by illegal migrants. And the taxpayers in New York are paying for that. And they're paying for their food, and they're paying for their housing, and they're paying for everything. And, it's the welfare state that has really changed the impact of migrants on the country.
So, right. And Nick's other work is on the growth of dependence on government. And over the years, he's done a lot of this. And he has detailed the astronomical growth, not just of welfare recipients, which I think has grown more slowly, but of disability. I want to underscore something really important here, though. Again, Mark and I protest all the time. Oh, we're pro-immigration. And Mark and I are, well, let me speak only for myself and say, we're not pro-immigration only for people from Norway or Germany, white-looking people like us. I am pro-migration. And Nick has an absolutely devastating statistic about America that explains to you, our listener, dear listener, why you need to be pro-migration as well. The only growing cohort for so-called, what he calls Anglo-Americans, white, native-born Americans, the only growing cohort in an age group is 75 plus. If we did not have migration in this country, we would look like Japan, right? We do not have enough people to fill the jobs that we have. What is the problem? The problem may be at the border in part. The problem may be with the welfare state in part. The problem may be with the mentality of states like California and New York in part. But shame on us that we don't do a better job trying to educate people, trying to keep people here who are smart, who are capable, who want to work, trying to be a magnet to people who are going going to build this country for the future. And they may come from South America, Latin America, they may come from Africa. They're not going to come from Europe, right? We know that they're not. And so we should be doing a better job organizing our immigration standards so that we have people here who we want, who get the attainments that they're capable of and don't become like Europe.
Well, no. So like Europe and everybody else, we have a fertility problem in this country. People are not having babies, and we're not at replacement level of our population. And so therefore, we are not producing the workers that will support the welfare state and support the country and fill the jobs. We definitely need migrants, legal migrants, in order to keep our economy growing, our GDP growing. They're absolutely essential. The problem is that the way we're bringing in migrants today is we're just opening the border and letting anybody come through, as opposed to having a system of migration that says, what kind of people do we need in America to fuel our economy and to fuel growth? What kind of people are we bringing in? People who want to work? Are we bringing in people with the skills that we need to fill the jobs that are not getting filled? Are we bringing in people who love America, or are we bringing in people who hate this country but just want to leech off of it, and oh, by the way, are anti-Semites?
That's just at Harvard and Columbia, Mark, please.
Oh, okay, sorry. But I mean, I think you know that I went to Mar-a-Lago before the election and I interviewed Trump about his views on legal migration. And one of the things that he said to me was that he thinks that everybody who comes here and graduates from a four-year institution ought to get an automatic green card. Now, maybe
I bet he doesn't believe that anymore.
Well, I'm not sure I do anymore based on what I've seen coming out of Harvard and some of these other schools. The problem is we got to fix how we're bringing in people in and who we're bringing in before you can do things like that. I look at some of the people who are graduating from Harvard and Columbia and all these schools, and I don't want to give them a green card. I don't think they should have been allowed in the first place. So we've got to fix the way we bring people in and bring the right people in. What Trump said to me was, we need migrants, but we need people who love America and who are coming here for the right reasons, who have the skills that we need to improve the economy. And I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I know you do.
And you do too.
Only up to a point, Mark.
If I had taken Trump out of that statement, you would have enthusiastically agreed with me.
No, actually, I don't think we should give people who go to American colleges green cards, because I think half of them are, well, not half of them, but I think a lot of them are going to end up trying to turn America into China and serve the Chinese party. Well, that's a
separate problem. Right? My caveat was we got to fix who we're bringing in and how we're bringing them in.
That's for sure. Anyway, we should get to our guest. So everybody remembers Nick Eberstadt because he's been on with us several times before. Our beloved colleague, Nicholas Eberstadt, is the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute, that fine institution, where he researches demographics, economic development, international security in the Korean Peninsula and Asia. He's also a senior advisor at the National Bureau of Asian Research, a founding board member of the U.S. Committee on Human Rights in North Korea. He has written the study that we talk about in this podcast, America's Immigration Mess. He's written an incredible book called Men Without Work about declining labor force participation. He's just a really smart guy.
Here's our interview. Well, Nick, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, we love having you on, but the reason we've brought you this time is because you've got a great new paper out called America's Immigration Mess, an Illustrated Guide. And you've done this work of actually pulling together the actual numbers, the actual data on all of these questions that have had such an effect on the last election and are roiling American politics in so many ways. Tell us, first of all, why you took on this project, what your key top-line findings were.
I took on this project as a total happy accident. Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, asked me if I would brief his board on the immigration situation in the United States, and that was a prompt to me to educate myself. And it wasn't as easy as I thought, because there's a lot of contentious, murky, gray area out there. Bottom line findings: first of all, immigration data, migration data are always bad, so sorting them out is always a problem. Secondly, the Biden era saw a huge influx of illegal immigrants, or immigrants in a special category that others could, especially protected categories. Not 30 million, but maybe as many as 15 million illegal immigrants in the United States now. Third, legal immigrants.
You mean 15 million came in under Biden?
Total number. We now have a higher proportion of foreign-born in the United States, mainly legal, but including illegal. We have a higher proportion of foreign-born in the United States than we had even in the 1890s. We've never been where we are now in terms of the total proportion of foreign-born in the United States. Another thing which is important is that legal immigrants have a higher educational profile than native-born Americans. Illegal immigrants, a much lower educational profile. The United States now is an economy that really depends upon foreign-born labor, including illegal labor. Might not be quite as easy from an economic standpoint as we might think. The surge of illegal immigration and the border chaos, the deliberately instigated border chaos under the Biden administration, had a huge impact on public support for all immigration, including legal immigration. I don't know that we could have done a much more brilliant job of poisoning American support for immigration than we did over the past 4 years, and that's going to take some repairing.
Mark and I have talked about the impact that the flood of illegal immigration during the Biden administration had, because, of course, we're very pro-legal immigration, and it's really sad to see how the numbers have changed pretty dramatically. Before we dive into the conclusions, first of all, I love this project. I love all your work, but this is it's absolutely fascinating, and it destroys a number of really important shibboleths that are vital for us to understand. But the first thing I want to ask you about is numbers. And the reason I want to ask you is because you, very early on in this study, and we'll link it in our transcript, very early on in this study, you talk about how crappy the numbers are, to use these scientific terms. You throw around my personal favorite acronyms, CPS and ECS. Can you just help us understand what your bases are before we dive into the facts?
Sure. Not just in America, but in all affluent democracies with any appreciable migration in or out. The migration numbers are way worse than births or deaths. Those are collected easily. You figure out how much migration there was as a sort of a residual off of the things that you can kind of trust, which is to say you take the number of people one year, the number of people the next year, you net out births and deaths, and then you kind of have a number of net migrants. Now, if you have a surge like we have, then you're really in trouble in trying to guesstimate how many people have come into the country through like the Census Bureau numbers, because they do their month-to-month or year-to-year estimates based upon surveys, sample surveys. Like, let's say for one of these reports, the current population survey, we use this for getting our employment numbers. It's got 60,000 households in it. How's that going to measure a surge like that? You're not going to do it terribly well.
So do we know, and one of the things that you point out is that it could be well over half of net migration during the Biden years might have been illegal. Do we know how many, is there a number we can say X million illegal migrants came into the United States during the Biden surge, or is that not a known or knowable number?
We can kind of guess at it by holding our hand in the lamp post and putting out our other hand into the ether and try to guess at it. But we're not going to come up with a perfect, accurate number. We could be able to have a kind of a ballpark.
What's your ballpark?
There's going to be a gross number of people who came in, and some of them went out, and then there'll be a net number. I mean, one of the things, Mark, that always happens is that people die, any population, people die, and people go home. I mean, and they don't necessarily go home because of the feds. They go home because of their own reasons. They've made the money they want to. They've got family reasons. In the great migrations of the 1890s, about half of all of the people from Italy who came to the United States went home.
Really?
And a lot of the illegal immigrants also go home. So the net number of increase in illegal immigrants is probably, of illegal migrants in the U.S., probably north of 4 million during the Biden administration. That's how many you can kind of substantiate through one or a number of Census Bureau surveys. But those aren't going to include necessarily the gotaways. They're not going to include people that Border Patrols never came across. It's probably not for another couple of years that we'll have a better sense of how many people came to our country as illegal entrants.
There was a great piece this weekend by Konstantin Kisin. I think it was by him in his Substack, and he takes on this very popular line that immigrants built this, but he takes it on for the UK. He was an immigrant to the UK in the 1990s, and he goes really really through history. And I mean, we're talking back, and basically makes clear that unless by immigrants you mean the Angles and the Saxons, or you mean the Normans, immigrants did not build it at all. That in fact, the number of migrants until very, very recently, as a percentage of the English population, British population, was less than 6%. And, looking at your statistics is what reminded me
What about the
of
Vikings,
it.
Danny? Forgot the
Forget that.
Vikings.
That's right.
Built and destroyed. Built and destroyed.
Exactly. They came, but they left. In any case, looking at your numbers, I think there are also a lot of misperceptions about American statistics. That in fact, the foreign born in America now exceed 15% of the population for the first time ever. And so, the 20th century was really a period, we think of it as a period rich in migration, but in America, actually, for about 7 decades, that wasn't true at all, right?
Danny, that's a really important point, and it's lost to our historical memory because nobody knows history of anything before they woke up yesterday morning. We had a huge surge of migration in the first Gilded Age, the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. At the same time that we had this huge surge, we also had this growing anti-migration movement. We came within a hair of basically stopping foreign migration in 1905. We came very, very close to it. What finally stopped foreign migration? 1914, the war. But after the war, it didn't let up. After the war, in the early 1920s, very strict legislation was put into effect limiting foreign migration to the United States. And that wasn't revisited and changed until the mid-1960s. What we're living with now didn't start until really the 1970s after that legislation. So why did people want to limit migration in the first age of migration? Because a lot of unskilled foreign labor was coming into the United States, depressing the wage rates of native-born, less educated people at a time when there were big income gaps and wealth gaps developing in America. Does any of that sound familiar to you?
Yes, indeedy.
It does.
We had, until, let's say, 2021, we had generally strong support in the United States for legal migration. Never had a lot of support for illegal migration. But over the past 4 years, that support has been very, very badly shaken. And I don't think that you need a psychiatrist to understand why this change of mood has taken place.
So are you saying that the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, is mythology?
Oh, the United States took in an enormous number, in both absolute and proportional terms, took in an enormous number of people, obviously mainly from Europe, in the last quarter of the 19th century and in the first decade of the 20th century. So all of that is true. We also, I don't get into this in the paper in any deep sort of way, but without mythologizing it or getting too Horatio Alger on anybody, we've got a pretty good record of assimilating people. Yeah. And I compare our record of assimilation of migrants to the record in Europe over the last generation, where they also have had a big surge of migration, almost as high a proportion of foreign-born in the EU now as in the US. But the results look a lot more promising, I would say, in the US than in a lot of Europe.
So one of the things that you mentioned, you think about what has changed since those early waves of migration. Two things that jump out to me is one, assimilation, the anti-assimilation movement in the US, and two, the rise of the welfare state. In those early years, there was, before FDR and the New Deal, there was no welfare state, so to speak. Of the welfare state was you were Polish and you came over and you went to the Polish neighborhood of New York and people took you in, they helped you find a job, they helped you get on your feet, and then you worked and you did that. And then within a generation or two, your kids were speaking English and playing baseball and you were as American as anybody else. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, from what I have seen...
And the impact that has on support for immigration.
Sure. From what I have seen, and it's not in this study that I just released, we still seem to be doing a pretty good job of assimilating immigrants from all sorts of different ethnicities from one generation to the next. You compare the Poles or the Italians in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and English language and so forth, and jobs with immigrants who are coming in now. Unlike Europe, foreign-born in the United United States are more likely to be in the workforce than native-born Americans. When it gets to the welfare state, as you pointed out, the welfare state used to be like the welfare, one's community, one's family, one's friends. Now we've got this construct that will be affected one way or another by newcomers in the U.S. Interesting work by the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a group that's generally supportive of tighter regulations on immigration. Very good work. They've looked at the Census Bureau's data on what is neutrally called by the Census Bureau program participation, and we'd call it welfare dependence. At any level of education, a foreign-born household, headed by a foreign-born person, is more likely to be using means-tested benefits than a native-born family in the United States. And also, those who are not naturalized citizens are more likely to be using these program benefits than those who are naturalized. So it is not a contradiction for immigrants coming to the United States to both be in the workforce and using a lot of U.S. government programs. Part of what we haven't looked at, I think, nearly carefully enough is what the net fiscal impact is of foreign-born. There's a big debate about this among pro-immigration and skeptic or anti-immigration group. If we're just going to be in stylized facts, I think it is generally true that the less educated, the older and the less educated the immigrants are, the more likely they are going to be a net burden on our fisc over time, not the budget solvers that we sometimes hear.
Right. So this is hugely important. And I want to talk about the makeup of American foreign-born people as well. But let's stick with this question of what it is they're doing. You make a very important distinction between illegal migrants and legal migrants in terms of their participation in the workforce and in terms of their education levels and their burden on society. Can you just talk about that part of the study a little bit?
Sure. Our shambolic legal migration system, arbitrary as it is, dysfunctional as it is, seems somehow to manage to bring in talent to the United States that has a higher level of matriculated skills and education than the native-born population. On top of this, and I didn't really get into this so much, but it's kind of important to mention, the giant sucking sound that you hear is inventors from all over the world coming to the United States. In the UN's World Intellectual Property Organization database, in their own kind of whatever way, crackpot or precise way that it may be, they identify people who they think have come up with significant inventions. I mean, that's their own system. But if you take a look at their numbers, net balance, there are only 2 countries in the world that are really big net recipients of inventors. One is little Switzerland, and the other is the United States of America. And if you try to put the United States of America on a chart with all of the other countries in the world, you can't, because the U.S. number is so high it like pops off of the chart. So there are these 2 aspects to our legal migration system. With respect to illegal migration, an enormous disproportionate fraction of illegal migrants, these high school dropouts from abroad, and generally they're from Latin America, Central America, South America, their men in this group have workforce participation levels that are kind of like college grads for the native-born U.S. guys, because there's a very hard work ethic there. But even this is affected by the welfare state. It's much lower workforce participation in California than in Texas, and that's a natural experiment we see in results from.
We see that foreign-born immigrants, legal and illegal, work hard. Help us understand, we had you on before, and you and I have talked about this over the years. Help us understand the mystery of native-born labor participation, because if you look at foreign-born, they have high labor participation rates. They also have higher consumption rates for welfare, for assistance programs. You look at illegal migrants, they've got pretty high, even though they have low levels of attainment, they've got pretty high workforce participation rates. Whereas native-born workforce participation has just collapsed. What's up?
You've got completely different mentalities. I mean, you've got people who are raised in completely different ways. They're raised in different countries. And when we mix together, for example, numbers on labor force participation rates for people people in America who are high school dropouts, we're averaging apples and oranges. When we're talking about men, for example, prime-age men, it's a tragedy, it's a disaster for the native-born men who are high school dropouts. Almost half of them aren't even in the workforce. It's not that the skills that are taught in 10th grade in El Salvador are so much better than the skills that are taught in the United States in 10th grade. That isn't what's happening. It's questions of motivation and behavior and values, outlook, mentality.
Well, it seems also that you have the people who are coming here, whether legally or illegally or throughout history, they're sort of a self-selecting population of go-getters, aren't they? In the sense that they're the ones who said, boy, I'm in a crappy situation in my country. I've got no future here. I'm going to get on a steamship in steerage class and take all my belongings in a suitcase and cross an ocean to a country where I don't speak the language and try and build a life. That has a sort of self-selecting motivation behind it, which is good for America, isn't it?
I would say absolutely. That's the historical pattern there. You have to be a big risk taker if you're going to leave everything behind. You have no assets. Your only assets are your own human capital, and you're going to risk this in a place where you may not even know the language, and you're going to start again. A lot of revealed entrepreneurship in there. We don't want to idealize it, but there is a lot of that going on, and that affects attitudes. What we saw that was different in the Biden era was that the United States became, the southwest border, the U.S.-Mexico border, became a kind of a gateway for illegal immigration from all over the world. It was no longer the case that most so-called encounters at the Mexico border were with people from Mexico. It became an international gateway. Now, some of this, and I don't show or try to show any numbers on this, some of this was organized by what in Asia they would call snakeheads, by cartels, by human traffickers. It's not unrelated to the fentanyl explosion in the United States. And just how much of that was kind of an organized trafficking, I'm not in a position to say. But just because we don't have numbers on it, hard numbers on it, doesn't mean it wasn't happening. It doesn't mean it didn't change the complexion of illegal flows during that time period.
The other difference is, going back to what we were talking about before, is the welfare state. In the olden days, when you had that person who put all their leather suitcase, got in their steerage class and took the ship over and came to America and then went into Little Italy or Chinatown or wherever it was and started to look for work. Here you see the illegal migrants coming in under the Biden administration, and they're being put up in luxury hotels in New York. And I remember watching, New York spent $5 billion in the first year in terms of support and feeding them and caring for them and all the rest of it. I remember once they set up a tent city for them to move them out of the hotels, and the migrants showed up and said, no, we're not going there. There was almost had a riot on their hands because the accommodations weren't good enough for them. There's something that's changed about the type of person who is coming to America, isn't it?
Well, I would say there was something that kind of changed about the people who were administering America's migration policies during that period. And I don't think that most voters kind of liked it too much from what we can tell. I would still make a distinction between the migrants, legal and illegal, who have come to the United States in the last number of decades, and those who have come to Europe. Despite all of the problems that we had in the last 4 years of Biden administration, I think we've got cohorts that we're going to be much more successful in assimilating. There's a whole question in Europe which is still apparently almost impossible for European intellectuals to talk about, which is the unassimilatable groups that they have brought in from Muslim-majority countries into particular European countries. It's not true of all Muslims. There are the Indonesian migration into the Netherlands is very successful. How do I know that? Because you never hear anything about it, right? Likewise, Muslims from India in UK assimilated very well, even though Muslims from Pakistan have assimilated much less well. How come one part of the Raj is better than another? We would only know if people had the courage to investigate it, which evidently they still do not.
Well, now, it's not courage that they're lacking. It's a willingness to go to jail at this point. I mean, this is the problem.
That's a true point.
I don't want to sound like, and I don't like him, J.D. Vance. But if you start to look at these stories
Vance
about,
is right.
Let's put it this way, J.D. Vance's motivations are disgraceful, but there are facts that support his allegation that free speech speech in Europe is certainly not a priority anymore. And I sent Mark and Kristen, our new producer, a piece that appeared in the Free Press just a few days ago. And the blurb of it says, a new report found that in France, Brotherhood, that's the Muslim Brotherhood, linked schools have distributed texts that praise Sharia law as superior to man-made law, denounce interfaith marriage, and vilify Jews. And the headline is How the Muslim Brotherhood is Changing Europe. I think that's right. Your data shows that that is absolutely correct. Is that reading it right?
Here's a huge difference, and this does show up in the numbers that the European Union is willing to collect. In Europe today, in the EU 27, if you are foreign-born and you're not if you're not foreign-born from another EU state, if you're born outside the EU, and you're a young person, you are twice as likely as young people from the EU to be neither in employment or in education and training. You are much more likely to be outside of society. You have not joined. You have not assimilated. That's not true of our immigrants. You do not find that they are neither employed nor in education or training, even illegal immigrants. The other thing which you see with again, and this is all with EU data, with their surveys or with OECD surveys, not the first generation of immigrants, but the second generation of immigrants in the EU are much more likely to say that they are discriminated against, that they have been victimized. There's a dissatisfaction for the second generation of immigrants in Europe that you don't see with the US.
I want to follow up on that because this is something I'm thinking about a lot, and I don't know whether it's true, but I think I might have mentioned it on one of our podcasts or somewhere else. Who the hell knows? I can barely remember what I ate for breakfast.
One of the many things you say that you're not sure if they're true.
Yes, it's true. I make things up constantly, as Mark knows. Yes, because my whole life is a lie. But here is my theory, which is mine nonetheless. If you now look at the increasing hostility of the European Union writ large to the state of Israel, and you look at the threats that have been made more recently by the likes of Macron, Keir Starmer, and even others, the Germans are still mostly on the sidelines here, but the Austrians join in happily. Hitler nostalgia is running strong there. What you see is a really strong change in policy towards Israel. And you see Macron trying to lead the way for a meeting this summer that will recognize a state of Palestine. He's roped the unbelievably anti-Semitic Canadian government into it. I suspect he'll rope the anti-Semitic Australian government into it. In Australia and in Canada, you see the exact same population phenomena that you described in Europe. Do you think that it's just me being a Jewish paranoid fabulist, as Mark would say?
I don't think I've ever said those words, Danny, but okay.
That's right, because Jewish didn't come into it. Really paranoid fabulist.
Just paranoid fabulous.
Do you think it's driving change in policy? And do you think there's any chance that we see similar drives to a change in policy here in the U.S.?
I think there's a lot of reason to be worried about this in Europe. You have the combination of the poisoned intelligentsia and the left as the real existing left, and large and growing rejectionist population of descendants of people from Muslim-majority countries in Europe. And I think I have to automatically do a Miranda rights thing and say not all of them are part of this, but you only need one little phalange to ruin your whole day. That's what we've seen before again and again. When you have a city like London, which I'm told is 1/6 Muslim at this point, it matters. In the United States, I wouldn't want to be complacent about this because we do have our Daytons and we do have our Detroit areas and so forth, and our upstate New York outside of Buffalo stuff. It looks to me as if our politics are more driven by the the Marxism for dummies, hard left, kind of college washed. Our real problem is we have taken so much money at universities from foreign governments that don't really wish us well, Middle Eastern governments, and this has created a kind of a beachhead in our universities for a lot of the poison that we're seeing nowadays.
So I want to turn to the universities in a moment, but before we leave Europe, Europe seems to have two problems with immigration that are different than here. One is that they have a much larger proportion of Muslim immigration from North Africa and the Middle East coming in, but they also have a cultural difference in that Ronald Reagan, his last speech as president, he read a letter that someone had sent him, and that person's wrote, "You can go to live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Germany or Turkey and Japan, but you cannot become a German or a Turk or a Japanese, but anyone from any of the corners can come come to America and become an American. Even with all of our problems now, we have greater assimilation. Because what it means to become an American isn't blood and soil. If you accept the creed, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, you ascribe to our Constitution. That's all it takes to become an American. That's not all it takes to become a Hungarian. You bring in a bunch of people into Hungary who don't have any intention of assimilating, don't share the culture, don't share the language, don't share the religion, or any European country, and they stop being Hungary. We don't stop being America if we bring in people from all sorts of different cultures. So how is that affecting Europe? Are we losing that resilience? Do we still have it? What are your thoughts?
Well, it may be more difficult to become a Hungarian or a German or a French, although, of course, the French have their famous Republican ideal that anybody can become French. And it's also true that until World War I, there was a lot of mixing of peoples around Europe with movements of populations. I mean, the Germans even had the word for it, the Volkswanderung and so forth. So they were able to assimilate to some degree. Part of what makes it harder to assimilate now, I think, in Europe is government policy, which tries to create and support communities rather than to assimilate people into a kind of a national mix. It's clear that in many places they haven't done it as well as the United States. And the United States isn't unique. Canada's pretty good. Australia's pretty good. I mean, the overseas British offshoots, I think, have done an awfully good job in different areas of the world. We have had this temptation in our politics and in our welfare state politics to balkanize groups that come and to encourage bilingualism in a way where people may not end up speaking English, even though that's kind of like your ticket to be part of the American creed and canon. Our welfare state policies aren't as generous as the European ones, and as the European friends never stop telling us. But that also, I think, is probably going to hasten the crisis of the European welfare state inadvertently, because they thought they were bringing in all of these workers to postpone the crisis of the welfare state, but disproportionately these were people who didn't have the labor force participation of native-borns, didn't have the educational profile of native-borns. With a heavily progressive big welfare state, this kind of turbocharges things. And you're really going to see it when all of this generation of immigrants retires and starts drawing much more than they put in from the European fisc.
There's another factor here, too, that nobody wants to talk about that I suspect we'll be seeing a lot more of, and that is that there are now increasingly ethnically segregated, foreign-born criminal organizations that are running a migration, right? So we see this on the border with Mexico. We see the trafficking groups, and we see how the mules, the human traffickers, are bringing people and narcotics into the United States. But to me, one of the most fascinating developments is you see this role being played by Albanian gangs inside the UK. But even more interesting, you see in Australia a massive arrest that was made where there was an argument about whether there was an anti-Semitic terrorist plot underway, and the police insisting, as well as the government, insisting that this was merely criminality. And the answer is that terrorist states like Iran, but also the Chinese and the North Koreans, are now using ethnic criminal gang to perpetrate their sort of terrorist crime, right? So it's not a jihadi, it's not a lone wolf, it's not Mr. Al-Qaeda, with a long beard and a wife who's covered in a burqa. It's what Australians call a barkie, right? It's a guy who's massive, covered in muscles, who's the head of a motorcycle gang, and whose parents immigrated from the Middle East. I mean, this is our future.
Sure. I mean, we've got triads in the United States, we've got cartels in the United States. I mean, it's kind of, we had the mafia, we had the Irish gang, so it's not exactly new, but I guess it's kind of wake up, Grandpa.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about the university. I think we've all been shocked to see the anti-Semitic protests happening at Harvard and Columbia and some of our most elite institutions. And a lot of those are driven by people coming here on student visas from these countries. We seem to have imported a little bit of the problem, not quite at the scale that you see in London and other countries in Europe, where our universities are infested with anti-Semitic sentiment. How did this happen, and how do we solve it?
Well, I mean, it all kind of started with Karl Marx, didn't it? I mean, it all started with, like, the most famous intellectual anti-Semite of the 19th century. And it's kind of hard to wash anti-Semitism out of the Marxist canon, for starters. And then when you deal with, the kind of Marx as told to, the sort of the Marx for dummies that you have for people who, even though they're in university, they don't ever really get around to reading anything. You can see how this kind of goes wrong. I think you both probably know more chapter and verse about Qatari, Saudi, other Middle Eastern money trails to American universities. My guess is that we haven't looked nearly deeply enough into this, and that it's going to be very shameful to a lot of people when this gets dug in appropriately.
So just like we saw how the illegal migration has reduced support for legal migration more broadly in the United States, and we agree, all of us, I think, that legal migration is very good for our country. Our country needs foreign workers. The country needs foreign talent. These protests have, I think, reduced public support for foreign students coming into the United States. And so, as you point out, we're the net magnet for inventors. We need talented foreign students. We want the brightest people from the world to want to go to Harvard and Columbia and all these other schools. But are we at risk of sort of destroying that by bringing in the wrong types of people?
We've got at least two problems and maybe more. We've got the anti-Semite agitators on campus visas. We also have a problem that we don't even yet have a name for with students from China in the United States.
Yep.
The overwhelming majority of them, from my own anecdotal encounters, would like to be Yankee Doodle dandies. They'd like to come over here and flourish in the United States. But you can't speak the entire truth without adding that they're also loyal sons of the CCP who come here, and that's a huge problem. That's an espionage problem. It's also a problem for changing domestic constituencies and domestic politics in the United States. And so we need to pay much more attention than we have done to the attempts of the Chinese government to influence American society and politics from within. And how you go about parsing this out, I don't think I can give you a recommendation on, but we need to start thinking about that. And we're about 25 years overdue on that.
Right. And of course, I can give you a good recommendation, which is that we need to shut down TikTok, which the president has illegally extended now its life for the third time. Unbelievable. But that would be one nice, quick way for us to get the Chinese out of our shorts, so to speak.
As always, we lied to Nick and told him, it'll just be half an hour, and we're now...
What's a half hour?
We're
I'm
never
not good with
truthful.
numbers anyhow, so it doesn't matter.
Nick, this is really fascinating. It tells us a lot. It tells us a lot about who's here, what they cost, and it doesn't help much telling us how to fix it. But then again, that would be a job for our body politic. God forbid it ever did that. Thank you tons, as usual, for this amazing work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
So, Danny, what do you think?
So all of this just forcibly reminds me of the same thing that I keep saying in every damn podcast. Our podcast should be renamed Congress Sucks. Let us count the ways. We need to have an immigration bill. We need to reform our immigration system. We cannot do it by executive order like some sort of banana republic. We just can't. We can't keep going back and forth between Biden's and Trump's, where we let in 5 million when Biden's president and then we deport 100,000 when Trump is president. It's just ridiculous. We need to fix the problem of the infrastructure. We need the law. And I don't know why Congress can't get its shit together.
Because nobody's going to take on the problem of legal immigration when we're being flooded by illegal migrants, when we can't secure the border. The prerequisite for immigration reform is border security, and we haven't had it for 4 years. I mean, Trump fixed it in a month. Biden told us, I need legislation from Congress to fix it. I need the bipartisan immigration bill to give me the authorities to do it. It's like, no, you didn't need anything. Donald Trump literally shut down the border in a month. It was a crisis of choice that Biden enacted on the border. And if you look at, Nick referred to it just in passing, but if you look at the Gallup statistics, when Trump left office after his first term, there was supermajority support for either keeping legal immigration at existing levels or increasing it. And now you have a majority that want to decrease legal immigration levels. How can you have a debate about how we reform our immigration system when people have turned against immigration? You have to fix the border first, and then you can can have a rational conversation about this whole thing. But
And
it doesn't
when will we
seem...
agree that Trump has fixed the border? I thought you just told me he's done it in a month.
Well,
what do we
it's
need to do?
It's fixed in the sense that we've plugged the leak of people coming in, but now we got to deport the people who came in illegally, which he's trying to do. And the Democrats are, he tries to kick out MS-13 gangbangers out of the country, and the Democrats are protesting. And they're showing up at ICE facilities, trying to charge the ICE facilities. And there are riots in Los Angeles happening as we speak over these efforts. And the Democrats aren't along with getting rid of these people. So, we've got a major problem still that has to be cleaned up. It's like when there's a flood in your basement, you got to stop the water from coming in, but then you need to clean up the mess before you can talk about renovating the basement. And so we're now at the cleaning up the mess people, and there are people in there who are trying to stop him from cleaning the mess. So I think we're a long ways away from fixing the problems and rebuilding public support for legal migration, because we need legal migrants, but right now people don't feel that way because Biden and the Democrats have turned them against migration, period. And they do it intentionally, by the way. They never talk about illegal migration. Well, this is anti-immigrant sentiment. No. And so they blur the lines between legal and illegal, and they're surprised when the rest of the country does too.
Yeah. The whole thing depresses me. All right. Well, on that uplifting note, thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.
Take care. See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.